Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Responsive Web Design 2. This is Lecture 10. Today, we're going to be covering CSS transitions and CSS transforms. So we're moving into web animation here. Okay? And we have a participation exercise, Pseudo Judo, which you'll get a chance to do in class. The only announcement I have is that the sign-in sheet is being passed around, so you can check your name off as it comes to you. Are there any questions before we get started? All right, no questions. We'll go ahead and jump right into it. CSS transitions. All right, so when an appearance of an element changes, so for example, if you were to hover over a button, okay, or an element, and when you hover over it, you set it up so that it changes its background color. By default, that change happens instantaneously. Okay, so it's an instant change from one appearance to another. Well, the transition properties allow us to control how that a change occurs, both in how long it takes to transition, whether or not it delays the transition, the speed curve of that, etc. All right, so there are four transition properties we use, and they are transition property, which is the CSS property to transition. You can specify which one or ones you want to transition. You have transition duration. That's how long it takes to transition from one state to the other. We have transition delay. This is how long to wait before the change begins. And then we have transition timing function. And this is probably the most confusing one, and we'll talk a little bit more about this on Thursday. But the timing function is the speed curve in which the transition occurs. So is it a linear change where it just gradually changes the same speed all the way through, or is it fast at the beginning or slow at the end? Again, we'll talk more about that on Thursday. All right, so CSS transitions. So this is what it looks like if you were to use the transition properties. You can use all four like this, or you can use the transition shorthand, which is more commonly used, where you just use the transition property and you set all four values in there. Now, if you use the transition property, it doesn't matter, the order doesn't matter. Okay? You can mix up the order. The only thing you need to keep in mind is that the first time value will be assigned to duration. Right? So other than that, you can order them however you wish. And CSS will figure it out. So in this example, we'll be just transitioning just the background. The transition will take 0.3 seconds to complete. We'll use an ease out function. That means it will be slower at the end. And we will wait 0.5 seconds before the transition begins. Now, I do want to make a note while we're here about duration. There is a certain speed or a certain duration that you need to reach and for the human eye to actually see it. So for example, if you're just doing a plain background change, anything below 0.2 will be almost, you won't really be able to see. The human eye just, right? So you do want to avoid that. But more often, you'll actually have your transitions go too long. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more on Thursday when we talk about animation. All right, so a couple other things about transition. The transition property the all keyword can be added to the transition property, and that will be applied to all properties. And that is also the default. So by default, it's set to this all keyword. If you wanted to add multiple different transitions, you can separate the different statements with commas. I have an example of that here. All right, so here we have the all. So this transition will apply to all properties of that element. But if we just wanted to target the width and the height, we can do so like this. So we have the properties there. So we have width, that's the property. Then we have the duration of 0.3 seconds and a delay of 0.5 seconds. Then we have the height. There's a comma between them, and the height will last or take 0.5 seconds to complete, and it'll wait 1 second. Right? So that's how that works. All right, that's it for transition. So let's go ahead and test this out. We're going to play with this. I have a little playground set up for this. So if we go out to the course website, mdac.github.io/mtm6201-w20. We'll go to the content page, and we'll go to week 6. So CSS animation. So here are the content pages for transition, transform, and the animation property, which we'll talk about more on Thursday. We'll have our exercise. We have Pseudo Judo, which we'll do today. Doomsday button is for Thursday. And then, of course, that's our midterm project. And then we have our slides for the day. And here is the access to the playground. We can go ahead and click on that. This just is a link to a code pen that I've set up ahead of time so that we can play around with it. Let's change my view here. All right, so we have this little box right here, and we have some buttons that will change the way the box looks. We can also hover over the box, which changes the background color. We can click on the box, click and hold, will change its shape. If we click the circle button, it turns it into a circle. You can hit the circle button again to make it back to a square. All right, so that's what the box is doing. But you notice all of these changes are happening instantaneously. I haven't set up any transition properties to the box. So when we see the background color change, it's instant. When we click it and we see the shape change, it's instant. And turning it into a circle is all instant. So let's go ahead and add some transition to the box so that we can see these changes occur. Now there's another thing that wasn't in the slides that you need to know about transition, is that the transition you wish to occur, or you will add the transition to the state you want to go to. So for example, there's no transition set anywhere. But if I want a transition to be applied to when I hover over it, I can apply it to the hover state. So here we have our class button hover. So I'm going to add a transition here. I'm going to add it just to the background. And I'm going to set it so that it takes 0.8 seconds to change. All right, now if I hover over the box, we can see that it did the transition. But if I come off the box, it snaps right back to red. Okay, that transition only works one way because we're only applying it to the hover state. Okay, so this is going to the hover state. That's where this transition occurs. We can also apply the transition to just the button, just to the box. Okay, so and I can do a different transition here. So if I want to do transition background, let's say I want to make it go faster, 0.3 seconds. So now if we hover over it, we can see that it takes slow, and it's much faster transitioning back. Maybe I want to add a delay to that. Let's say we add a 0.5 second delay. So now when I hover off, it just stays blue for a little bit, then does the transition. So we can see that effect. All right, let's play with another one. Let's see how we can add compound transitions. So if we look at the active state right here, that's when we click and hold down. That's what's changing the shape. It's making two different changes. It's making a change to the width and to the height. So let's add different transitions for both of those. So I'm going to add a transition here. And the first one I'm going to add is to the height. And I'm going to make it take 0.5 seconds to change the height. Then I'm going to add one for the width. And I'm going to make the width take longer, and to make it take 1 second. but I'm going to make it wait 0.5 seconds. So I'm going to make it wait till the height is done animating, is done making its transition before the width does its transition. Okay, so like that. So we have height set to 0.5 seconds for its duration. Then the width has a 1 second duration and a 5 second delay. All right, so if we go over to our box, we click, you see that the height animates first and then the width. So we do it again. See, it shrinks to the height and then expands the width. Okay, so that's what we can do with transition. Now we can add one more to our circle here. We can do a transition. Let's do a nice long transition here. Or let's do a really short one so you can see what I mean by not being able to detect it. So I'm going with 0.1 seconds. And you can kind of see it. It's somewhat there. The circle is actually doing a lot. It's when you have pretty small. But if we jump this down to like 0.01 second, that's pretty fast. It's almost instantaneous. You're not going to see anything that fast. All right, but you can go ahead and go really slow with it. Like we can do 10 seconds. All right, so if we click this, you can see in slow motion as it turns into a circle. Okay, so you can have a lot of fun with transitions. All right, any questions? Yeah. Which, what I had before the 10 seconds? Oh, up above here? Yeah. Okay, yeah. All right. And then for this one, we have to click and hold it. Oh. Or that one for the circle. So yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. All right, so that's transition. Any questions? There's not a whole lot to it. But it's a very, very simple way of adding animation to your page, and it's pretty effective. All right, let's move on then. Okay, transform. All right, so the transform property is used to change the shape and or position of an element. Okay, and it does this through you can transform both in 2D and in 3D. We will not cover 3D in this course. We're just focusing on 2D. You can do both 2D and 3D, and it does this through transform functions. So we have a series of transform functions which allow us to make transformations. Now we're only going to cover 4 of them, and that's translate, rotate, scale, and skew. Those are the 4 we're going to cover in this class, but there are more than this. All right, so before we get into actually talking about the transform functions, we need to talk about transform origin. All right, so the transform origin specifies the transformation point of an element. So some of our functions rely on this transformation point. We can adjust the point of the transformation using the transform origin property. And we provide it with 1 or 2 values to move that point around. Okay? We can move the point even outside of the element. That's actually quite common to make different animations occur. And by default, the transform origin is at the center of the element. Okay? So if we have a circle or a square, it's right in the dead center. All right, so we have, again, here's some different examples. The first one's the default. Again, it's just set to center. We can use keywords, so we can use like top left, and that will put it at the top left corner of our transition. And then we have where we can add values, so we can do 100 pixels and negative 50 pixels. So in this instance, the first number is going to be your x direction, that's the horizontal, and the next number is the y direction, which is the vertical. Okay? So this would move the point 100 pixels to the right and 50 pixels up. Okay? That's how that works. So negative is up and to the left, positive is to the right and down. Okay, so that's transform origin. We won't really be using it too much, but you can. All right, well, we'll get an example of what it looks like too. All right, so translate. This is the first function we're looking at. The translate function allows us to move an element in the y along the y and x axis. It can take 1 or 2 arguments. If you only have 1 argument, it just applies that to both directions. If you use 2 arguments, you can specify which one. Or it goes, the first one's the x, the second one is the y. You can use both positive and negative direction. You can use positive and negative values, and values can be either a length or a percentage. All right, so here's some examples. So this top one is going to move down 100 pixels and right with 50 pixels. Okay, so 50 pixels is the x direction. Again, that's horizontal, and because it's positive, it's moving to the right. Okay, from its center, from its point. Okay, and it's the 100 pixels is in the y direction. Okay, that's the vertical, and so it's going to move down. If we have negative numbers, it moves in the opposite direction. Keep that in mind. Let's translate. Okay, next one. Translate's pretty self-explanatory. Rotate. Next one's rotate. So the rotate function rotates on the transformation point. This is where it's the transformation point comes in key, especially with rotate. So if you think about your coordinate system, again, we have x runs horizontal, y runs vertical. If we're in 3D, we have z, which goes straight in. We're actually, when you do the rotate function, it's rotating along the z-axis. So it rotates this way, or clockwise or counterclockwise. Okay? You can also rotate along the x and y-axis by using rotate x and rotate y. I don't have slides on that. I apologize. So the rotate function takes an argument, that's an angle, and we can use any of these different units for angles. Most of the time, you're just going to use degrees and turns, though, or turns. And you can use positive numbers or negative numbers. So if you use a positive number, it rotates clockwise. Negative number rotates counterclockwise. All right, so here's just basically showing you different units you can use. So if you're doing, all of these do a full circle around. So it's 360 degrees is full circle. 1 turn's a full circle. 400 grads are a full circle. And 6.2832 is roughly a full circle. Radians is based off of pi, so you can't get an exact number. All right, so this is more useful. Okay, so here, this one's showing you that if you wanted to rotate 1/4 of a circle to the right, you can use positive 90 degrees. Again, that rotates to the right or clockwise. Negative number rotates counterclockwise. Okay, so with turns, you can use a decimal, so you can do less than 1 turn. This is stuff that makes more sense when we get into our example. I'm just going to brush through this and we'll get into our example. All right, so scale allows you to resize an element. This one takes 1 or 2 arguments. Okay, if you just provide 1, it will scale evenly both in the x and y direction. If you provide 2, you can specify each one individually. When you're using a scale, 1 represents the normal size. I often mix this up. I often put 0 and wonder why my element disappeared. I'm like, why did it disappear? I'm like, oh, right, I shrank it down to nothing. 1 is its normal size. Anything greater than 1 will make it get larger. Less than 1 makes it get smaller. If you hit 0, it disappears altogether. Okay? Content inside of the element will also be scaled. Okay, so you have to keep that in mind. If you have text inside of an element, it will get smaller as well. Another thing to keep in mind, when you scale an element, it will not affect the other elements around it. It doesn't push everything out of the way or other things just crowd around it if it gets really small. It actually gets its position set to absolute, so it kind of just grows over top of the other element. And here's some examples of using the scale function. Last one is skew. Skew is probably the one you're going to use the least, because what it does is, as the name suggests, it skews your element at a specific angle. Makes it go at an angle, lean a little bit. So the skew function takes 1 or 2 arguments again, and these are degrees. And you can use any of the degree, or excuse me, these are angle units, so you can use any of these units, degrees, turns, gradients, or radians. Arguments can be positive or negative, and it will affect the way the shape leans. Okay? And again, any content inside of an element will also be skewed. If you wanted to avoid that, this is true for all your transformations, because all your transformations technically will affect the items inside. But with like skew, for example, if you wanted to skew an element but not skew the content, you can actually set the content inside to do an opposite skew. And what that will basically cause it to do is make it stay upright. Okay, because it will reverse the skew, and it actually looks pretty cool. I'll show you another example here. And here again is how you use skew. Okay, so this is all boring stuff. Let's go actually try this out in our example. So let's go to our playground again. And we have the buttons down below, circle there. We have translate, rotate, scale, and skew. And what these buttons will do is they'll add a class to our box of those names to basically allow us to transform the shape. All right, so we need to add those classes. So the first class we're going to add is the translate. So we're going to add the translate class to translate our box. So let's add translate here. And let's use the transform property and the translate function to move our box. So let's do translate. Okay, and let's move our box. Let's say we'll move it 50 pixels and minus 50 pixels. So how will our box move at this point if we were to run this? I heard down, up, left, right. Down and right. Up and right, up and right. Okay, so it's up and right. So here, let me put a comment in here. So remember that for positive numbers, or for this one, it's going to move to the right and up. Okay. If I were to reverse this, then it would be to the left and down. So the way it look at it, here's the center. Let me actually get a whiteboard here. If you think about a coordinate system, this is actually what it's based off. If this is 0, 0, everything past here are negative numbers, right? Negative. And these would be positive numbers. This is a standard coordinate system if this is 0, 0. And that's what it's based off of. So positive numbers move to the right and down. Negative numbers move up to the left. Okay. So that's a way to remember translate. That's how that works. Okay, so But right now, when we do this, you notice it just jumps there automatically, and it jumps back, by the way. I've got some JavaScript to automatically reset our shape. But we're not seeing it move. What do we need to do to make it see it move? How can we see it move? Right now it's just jumping, but we need to use the transition property, right? We need to add a transition to our translate so that we can see it. So we're going to do transition, whoops, forgot my colon there, transform. And let's say it takes 1 second. All right? Now when we hit translate button, we can see it move. Okay? And again, it will snap back. That's some JavaScript I have on the page. Okay, so let's see it again. There we go, moves. All right, let's change our translate function so that it goes straight down. How would we do that? You got a question? If you do the circle first, oh, did my circle break? Oh, right, we got this super long transition time. Let me set this up to being faster. Okay, there we go. There you go. So you got to do it that way, then it wipes it out. So if you hit circle first, then you hit the translate button, then it will move. All right, but let's get our box to move straight down. How would we do that? What's that? Right, we want the box to just go straight down. This one's going to be 0. And what's this one supposed to be? Plus something? 100 maybe? Okay, so now we do translate and move straight down. Okay. All right, so that's translate. Allows you to move items. This is really handy for hiding items off the page, by the way. So, for example, navigation. You sometimes see the navigation slide over and slide off. They're using the translate transform for that. Okay, we could do that right here. If we wanted this to slide off the page, so let me switch this to 0. I'm going to slide it off to the left here. So I'm going to do negative 100%. Now if I do translate, oh, I guess that's not enough. Let me do 200%. Wait, let's do it a lot. Let's do it. Okay, make sure it gets off the page there. There we go. So it's off the page now, and it'll come back once it resets. Okay, so we can have it slide off the page and then have it reveal. Yes. Okay. Any questions about the translate function? Right, you might have to change this depending on the width of your page. Might be better to use width here. Let's say something 12, say 1900 pixels. Oops, I need to go negative. So I go the other direction. There we go, now it's gone. Okay, that's translate. Any questions? Let's move on to our next. Let's move on to rotate. Okay, so if we wanted to add the rotate, we need to add the class rotate here. And rotate function allows us to rotate the element clockwise or counterclockwise. Okay, and it takes an angle unit. So again, we can use degrees, turns, gradients, or radians. Again, most of the time you're just going to use degrees or turns. I find turns really helpful, so I don't have to even calculate the degrees. It's like, oh, how many times do I want to rotate? Oh, I just want to rotate 3 times around. So that's 3 turns. Okay, or 3 turns. Okay, so if we were to do this, and we were to click our rotate button, what would we see happen? Right, nothing. It happens instantly and it's back up. Now, if we were to do 3.5, what will happen? Right, so we'll see it upside down, like that. Okay, but again, we're not seeing all the rotating going on because we need that transition. Okay, so let's go ahead and add a transition here. So we'll do it on transform, and we're going to do it, let's do it really fast. Let's do 0.3 seconds. Okay, so we can sit here, we can rotate, and we can see it rotate. It's going to stop upside down, and it's going to reset here and flip back. Okay. Now, when you did this, you'll notice that the text moves as well. Okay, so we can fix that so that the text doesn't move with the box. The text is inside of a strong tag. So if we were to apply a transformation to the strong tag that is the reverse of the rotate, so we're going to add the rotate here of the main rotate class. And to do reverse, we just change the sign. So this is a positive 3.5 turn. So we're going to do negative 3.5 turn. Actually, let's make this 3 so it doesn't end up upside down. Okay, so we're just going to do 3 and 3. Make them the same. So we have positive and we have negative. Now if you hit rotate, got to add the transition here. Don't want to forget that. Whoops, not negative 3 seconds. Happens in the past. Okay. There you go. Now you can see that when it rotates, the text actually stays put, but the box rotates. Okay, so we reverse the transformation, and it causes it just to stay put. All right, any questions about that? Seeing a lot of confused looks. Yours doesn't work. Click on the rotate button. There you go. All right, any questions about rotate? All right, so this is just plain rotate. This is rotate, the rotate function, and I did say that the rotate function rotates on the z-axis. If we want to rotate on the x or y axis, we can use rotate x or rotate y. So if we were to do rotate x, it's going to rotate along the x-axis, which runs horizontal. Okay, so we can try that, and we can see. Well, actually, let's turn the. I'm going to take this off because that's doing some counter rotation here. So we can see that it's doing this kind of flipping thing. So it's flipping up like this, right? Because again, we're dealing with 3D here, but it's rotating like this along the x-axis. Let's slow it down so you can see that a little bit better. Set this a few seconds. Okay, so you can kind of see that it's rotating along that z-axis. Okay, if you want to rotate on the y-axis, make it spin. You just do rotate y, and now it spins. Okay, so those are pretty common uses for doing rotation. Okay, so you have rotate x, rotate y. There is also rotate z, which is just rotate. It's the same thing. All right, any questions about that? Let's move on to scale then. Okay, so we'll add a scale class here. Question, yes? Yeah, you're doing it on the strong. So instead of the, right, if you look here, you have it rotating. So this is doing the rotate on the z-axis, but you have rotate x strong. So your text is rotating differently than your y. Yeah, you have. Okay, let's move on to scale. So with scale, we can change the size of an element. Okay, so again, we'll add our class scale, then we'll do transform, scale. Now, if we just do scale 1, it remains its same size. That's the default size. Larger than 1, we increase the size. Okay, so 2 in theory is twice the size it was. Okay, if you want to do half its size, it's 0.5. You hit 0, your element doesn't exist anymore. Okay, it's so small it's poofed out of existence. All right, so that's that. We can also change the different shapes, so we can do, or the different axes, so you can do either both in the x or the y direction. All right, so let's test this out. Let's go ahead and set this scale to 2. This will double its size. And let's add a transition so we can see it happening. And we'll make it nice and slow so we can watch it in slow motion. Okay, so I'm going to set it to 2 seconds. Okay, so we have transform, scale. We've set it to 2. There are no units, just a relative 2. Then we hit set to 2 seconds. So if you click the scale button, it will grow. Now notice that the buttons didn't get shoved out of the way. It just grew over top of them. Okay, that's because, again, with all the transform, the element gets kind of this position absolute. So it gets out of the flow of the elements and just kind of grows over top of them. So with position relative, it goes within the flow. So it would shove things out of the way. Like if we were to just increase the size of the box itself, it would eventually move the other elements. They would move or flow around it. But with position absolute, or with the transform scale, it just goes over top of them. And this is done all automatically by CSS. So we don't have to worry about that. Okay, so that is growing bigger. We've set it to 2. If we want it to grow really small, we can change it. Let's go 0.2. Again, less than 1 is going to make it shrink. So if we do this, we can see that it gets really small. And again, notice that the text grows and shrinks as well, along with it. Now, right now, we're just adding one value here. So that's being applied to both the x and the y. But we can change that. Okay, so we could leave the x at 0.2, and we could change the y to 2. Okay, now this is going to change the ratio of our box, and it's going to get skewed. So let's see what that looks like. So you can see that it's getting really small in the width, but it's growing in the height. Okay, so we get a kind of weird shape. Let's see that again. You can see it's kind of getting squished and squashed. Okay, so again, that is scale. Any questions? Scale. All right, the last one we want to work with is skew. Okay, so we'll make a class skew. And for this function, again, it causes our shape to kind of lean. Okay, so let's do skew here. And it takes an angle again, so we can use degrees, turns, radians, or gradients. With skew, you typically just use degrees, though. So we can just do 15 degrees like that. Okay, and with this, so we do 15 degrees. So let's add our transition so we can see what that looks, so we can watch it. Do 0.5 seconds. There we go. So we have there, and I'm going to go ahead and click the skew button, and we can see that, there we go, it's leaning to the left. right? If we want it to lean to the right, we just change the sign, right? We make it a negative number. Okay, so negative degrees, we can click skew, now it's skewing to the right. Again, notice that the text skews too. If we wanted to fix that, if we wanted just our box to skew, maybe you wanted that. Maybe you want the box to be skewed, not just for animation purpose, but to be displayed that way. But you want the text to remain upright. Again, we just reverse it. So we can do this. We can do skew, strong here. And we'll do a transform, skew, and we'll just skew it in the opposite direction. 15 degrees. And again, we'll do a transition of 0.5. And if we were to click on this, notice that the text stays normal. It's not being skewed, but our box is. Again, this can be a way of adding a unique design to your site, even without the transition. Just, hey, I want the box to be a little bit at an angle here, but I don't want my text to be that way because it makes it difficult to read. All right, and that's skew. So with skew and rotate, we can affect its transform origin as well. I forgot to cover this. So we can change where that origin is, where that point is. Right now, it's right in the center of our box. So when we saw it rotate, that's why it rotated around that center. We can change that transform origin. Let's do that. Sorry, I forgot to cover this. So I'm going to go back up to my rotate, because rotate's the one that uses the transform origin the most. So I'm going to go back up to my rotate, and I'm going to switch it back to rotate here. And it's going to be rotated 3 turns. And now I'm going to update its transform origin. Again, right now it's right in the center. But I'm going to move it up, so it's outside of the box. So let's see, I'm going to do transform origin here. Whoops, did I spell it right? Origin. And we'll set the first value to 0. That's the x direction, horizontal. Okay, but I want it to stay in the middle. I just want to move up the point up a little bit. So I'm going to say 200 pixels. Okay, so we've changed that point. Now, if we hit rotate, notice that the box is now rotating. Whoops, I wanted to go up. Be negative here. So now, notice that the box, there it goes. You notice it's rotating around that point. So rather than spinning, it's rotating around. You can add some really amazing effects by doing this. Okay. What's also really cool is when you start combining these together. Okay, you can add multiple functions to the same transform property. You can also add different transform to different parent elements, and you can create some really cool animations this way. Just take a look at stuff on CodePen with some of the things people can do just with the transform. All right, so that is transition and transform. Are there any questions? All right, let's go ahead and work on our assignment then. Pseudo Judo. Okay, so this is a CodePen assignment, so make sure you fork your pen, and remember that the fork button's down at the bottom now. And what you're going to be doing for this assignment is you're going to be using the transition and transform properties to help the ninja do its moves. Okay, so there's different moves that it needs to do. You'll need to do that. And then you'll submit your URL to Brightspace. And this is, of course, due tonight. All right, so let me go ahead and open this up. Go back to our content page. We can go to Pseudo Judo. And that's where the link for the CodePen is. All right, so we have our little ninja there. And he has different actions. So for the first one, we want to mouse over the button, or excuse me, we want to mouse over the ninja, and he will fade out. Okay, so we want to use the opacity for that. Okay, so we just hover over him. When we say, and then we have the mousing out, that's coming off of hover. So remember, we can change to both directions. For number 3, you got to click on the ninja. You want to use the active pseudo class. That's what triggers the clicking, and you got to click and hold. The moment you release it, you no longer have an active state. Okay, so that's for that one. The rest of them all deal with the buttons provided. Okay. All right, so I'll give you 15-20 minutes to work on this on your own, then maybe we'll come together and do it as a class. Okay, so that is Pseudo Judo. You can work on that. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up my slides, though, before you go to work. All right, so that's it for transition and transform. On Thursday, we're going to cover the animation property. So that's taking the animations to a whole new level. We have a lot more control with the animation property. We'll have a participation exercise along with that doomsday button. Okay, so we'll use that on Thursday. Okay, so go ahead and work on Pseudo Judo, and good luck.